Good evening. I'm Olivia Las Gonzalez, Executive Director of San Francisco Camerawork, and I want to welcome you all to tonight's panel discussion, Uncovering Histories, Crystallizing Memory, Photography and Placemaking, a conversation with FORECAST 2021 artists Katina Alexopolus, Trent Bozeman, and Jamie Robertson, moderated by Delphine Sims. Before we begin, however, we would first like to acknowledge the original inhabitants of this land that many of us call home. We are called San Francisco Camerawork, and what is now the San Francisco Bay Area is on the stolen and unceded land of the Ramayatush and Muwekma Ohlone people, to whom we owe a collective debt. We thank the indigenous peoples of the Bay Area for stewarding this land throughout the generations. We've all benefited from being settlers on this land, and we are incredibly grateful. Please let us know in the chat where you are joining us from tonight with the present name of the place and the name of the original inhabitants. We've put a link in the chat so you can look up your area. Before I introduce our panelists, I want to share a few upcoming programs with you. Next week, we are excited to bring you another artist talk in conjunction with FORECAST 2021. On Tuesday, April 5th, from 6 to 7 p.m. Pacific time, we present an artist talk by Christian K. Lee, who is also one of the FORECAST 2021 exhibiting artists. Actually, that's not next week. I'm sorry. That's a little bit away. On Tuesday, April 12th, from 6 to 8 p.m., we are pleased to welcome the photographer and educator Nigel Poor to lead our monthly members critique. And on Tuesday, April 19th, we will hold our first Artist Toolkit series program, Writing Your Artist Statement, with Dorothy R. Santos, which will be from 6 to 7:30 p.m., also Pacific time. There are many more upcoming programs which are scheduled and can be viewed on our website. So now, without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speakers. The moderator of this program, Delphine Sims, is a curator, writer, and Ph.D. candidate in the History of Art department at UC Berkeley. With a focus on the history of photography and Blackness, she has curated and organized public programming for the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Santa Barbara Museum of Art, Autograph ABP, and SF Camerawork. In addition to exhibition catalog contributions, her writing can be found in Matte Magazine, The Believer, and Aperture. Currently, Delphine is an Andrew W. Mellon Pre-Doctoral Fellow in the Photographs Department of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the 2021-23 Wyeth Fellow at the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts. So we are extremely lucky to have her here tonight. As for the artists that we have here today, Katina Alexopolus is a film photographer based out of San Francisco. Whether she's photographing fashion editorials or documenting the streets, Katina's work focuses on topics pertaining to cultural, social, and personal identity. In 2019, she received a BFA in photography at the Academy of Art University with emphases in commercial photography and documentary film portraiture. Trent Bozeman is a lens-based artist from Los Angeles by way of Chicago. Coming from a journalism background, he is interested in how Black history is reshaped, documented, and presented and preserved. Combating the erasure of Black legacies and histories has long been a recurring theme in his projects. His current photographic work is based in the Arkansas Delta in the small town of Elaine, Arkansas. His past ongoing work explores Gullah Sea island communities, specifically Wadmalaw Island, where his family is from, and the memories that continue to prolong their cultural significance. Jamie Robertson is a visual artist and educator from Houston, Texas. She earned a BA in art and an MFA in studio art with a concentration in photography and digital media from the University of Houston. She also holds an MS in art therapy from Florida State University. She is a former recipient of the American Art Therapy Association Pearlie Robertson Award and Red Bull Arts Microgrant. Robertson is also one half of the podcast Where I See Me, which examines the presence of Black and Brown people in the comics and media. Her creative practice is an autobiographical examination of history and identity in the African diaspora through the mediums of photography and video. Her work has been exhibited at the Art League Houston, Florida A&M University, Foster Tanner Fine Arts Gallery, 516 Arts, and internationally at the Contemporary Calgary and Exposure Photography Festival in Canada. Her photo book, Charting the Afroscape of Leon County, Texas, was published in December 2020 with Fifth Wheel Press. She currently works as a lecturer at the Sam Houston State University, and her works can be viewed at jamierobertson.com, jamieVrobertson.com. Before we begin, I want to note that closed captioning has been enabled and can be turned on in your settings. We will also be recording the program, which will be available on our website later this month. And please, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and we will have a question period at the end of the program. Now I will turn the floor over to Delphine and our panelists and Christina Graber. Thank you. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. Immense thanks to SF Camerawork for inviting me to take part in this discussion. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with you all, and I thank you for joining us for this panel. I'm now going to read through some brief thoughts I put together on the concepts that link these three fantastic artists. So in writing about the landscape photography of fellow artist Dawood Bey, Torquazi Dyson posed the following question: how do we invent new aesthetic forms that are imbued with radical ancestorship and that address our insistence on liberated spatial practice? This is a big and slightly wordy question, but I think it's one that really synthesizes a contemporary moment in art where we're seeing particular attention to the meeting point between histories, memory, kinship, and place. Such a shift within the world of photography includes Bey's work, as well as the three artists featured on today's panel, Trent, Jamie, and Katina. But let's unpack the intersection between Dyson's question and our panelists. Today, we are witnesses to aesthetic practices that weave together personal, material, and visual relationships, from the diptychs and triptychs of intimate interiors and urban geographies in Katina's work, to the way that the cloak of night catalyzes memory and knowledge sharing in Jamie's photographs, to the beauty and revealing and retelling history through a practice of seeing and teaching seeing in Trent's black and white photographs. We are witnesses to the promise of radical ancestorship for Trent. This is to learn and conjure buried and ignored past, but also thoughtfully offer himself as mediator to help locals articulate the many lives of their beloved small town. For Jamie, ancestors hover in and around photographs of family reunions and multi-generational households, locating what it means to make home and ways of being together. And for Katina, her photographs welcome us into the intimacy of grief as she and her family mourn their newest ancestor, the abuela that was and is their nexus. Dyson's question ends by drawing our attention to space. These three artists all offer us work located in Southern geographies. We come to understand the particularities of named places, Elaine, Arkansas, Leon County, and Taylor, Texas, through the way that the honored subjects of these photographs guide our orientation to the spaces under their care. And lastly, before I hand it over, I want to acknowledge SF Camerawork's Christina Garber for the excellent title for this panel, which expertly draws our attention to the themes that bring these artists together: uncovering histories, crystallizing memory, photography, and placemaking. Specifically, I want to highlight the way the title gestures to work in progress. For not only do we have the opportunity to witness these incredible emerging artists, but we can also understand the promise and potential for their projects to not yet be fully uncovered, not yet be crystallized nor made, but in the process of becoming and constantly unfixed in their interpretations. And with that, I will hand it over to Trent.
Thank you, Delphine, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm going to dive straight in and hopefully it is full screen. So much of my work's purpose is to combat the cultural and systemic erasure of Black legacies. And for me, that is relying on oral histories and firsthand accounts. And I began 2 projects that are steadily turning into one. Right now, I am in my 2nd year of an MFA program at the University of Arkansas, of course in photo, and I'll dive into some of the work. So pictured here is my dad's side of the family based on Wadmalaw Island, about 30 minutes from Charleston, South Carolina. And I wanted to start here because my family for me has been the most significant influence in my practice over the years. And here the Harrison family is gathered at a family reunion outside of my great-grandmother's house off Maybank Highway. Growing up, my grandparents rarely spoke about their way of life or their upbringing on the islands, but I knew it was something really significant because my dad always went back there every summer, and he had always talked about just Gullah traditions in general, but he never used the word Gullah. And for those that don't know, Gullah Geechee is the cultural signifier of people who live on the sea islands of South Carolina and Georgia. So there's only one way on the island and one way out. And when you're coming and going, you'll pass over the Esau Jenkins Bridge, which is on over here to the left. And it's a bridge named to highlight the man responsible for transporting islanders to the city for work when cars weren't as easily accessible as they are now. To the right is a family friend, Gavin Henderson, pausing to take in the view of his grandfather's land. Wadmalaw, like many other areas within the Gullah Geechee Nation, has been troubled over the decade with heirs property laws. Much like other cultures throughout this country, it's very easily to have your land irreversibly stolen due to no legal land deed or wills that are passed on. And it's one of the leading causes for displacement among islanders, also along with climate change. So when I first started going out to the island, which is the end of 2018, and a lot of this work was made in 2019 and 2020, before the pandemic, I was really trying to understand what some of the contemporary issues are for people who are living on this island, and also getting firsthand accounts of lived experiences of lifelong members of Wadmalaw. Just to put this into perspective, Wadmalaw used to be 98% Black in the late 90s, and now it's about 50-50. And if you look at nearby, islands, you're seeing, golf resorts and country clubhouses and plantation land that is now like used for weddings on land that was originally intended for freed slaves. With no city water or trash pickup, businesses are not able to open on Wadmalaw. And to many, this is a positive thing, with neighboring islands having property tax increases due to commercial development. This is one of the 3 businesses on Wadmalaw that serves as a tire shop, snack shop, a pool lounge, and a barbershop. And it's the usual meeting place for some of the younger residents of the island. And here pictured, I have Jimmy Smith, who is also my grandmother's really good friend. His wife is my grandmother's friend. And I wanted to make a picture that I called, like back in the day, I called it like the aperture moment, when you were making these portraits that were just like right dead center in the middle, with of course objects and ephemera around them. And this is back when I was working a lot in color, and I was really drawn to this, just to this room. And actually, like right behind where I'm standing, of course you can't see, this room is like completely undone. So I was really excited to get this chance to photograph Jimmy, someone who unfortunately is no longer with us, but I speak to his wife Mary pretty often. The land to many of the Sea Islanders is a living and breathing terrain that holds the spirits of our ancestors for knowledge and for strength. Pictured on the left here is Chiefess Giovanni walking me through her backyard. She points to a bushel of muscadine while remarking that the land has provided her with that specific grave since she could remember. To the right, we have Junior, who upon meeting him, I had no idea we were family members. I remember knocking on his door, telling him who I was and who my family was. And that's basically how a lot of my interactions started on the island. Everyone is kin to each other in some kind of way, whether through marriage or distant relatives. After asking him some questions and going through a bit of a small talk, we were able to make a picture that to me spoke to the importance of ownership, specifically property ownership. And as of right now, this work is still ongoing as I continue to make trips back to South Carolina. But some of the things I'm more interested in now is where African folklore, specifically West African folklore, plays into this culture. And that kind of goes into the whole root medicine, that surrounds this culture in the Sea Islands. But I will move on. So making work in Elaine for me was pretty similar to making work in Arkansas. I moved to Arkansas in 2020 for grad school after not living here for about 15 years. And I knew I wanted to start another project that intertwined history with community, but I was pretty unclear as to like what that was really going to be. I started going to Elaine just after finding out about the history of the place. I never spoke with anyone, did not know a single person before going there. And it troubled, but didn't surprise me that, you know, as someone who took Arkansas State history in junior high school, I'd never heard of what took place here, or what took place in Phillips County for that matter. So for me, that spoke to the lack of education that I had to deal with, and also these kids have to deal with that I'm around photographing. And also, it speaks to how the South in general really tries to cover up its narratives, and also makes it so trivial to the point where you don't know what's real and what's not. And that's kind of how the massacre exists within this town. Some call it fake news. Some believe that it has to be spoken about, and some people would rather never bring it up again. Going back to what I said earlier, much like the work in Wamala, I wanted to understand the current issues and the overall lived experiences for the Black residents specifically in Elaine. It's a town a little bit over 400 people. That's a little over 50% Black, so it's about half and half. And the largest demographic in the town are kids aged 18 and below. So with schools closing in 2005, kids in Elaine go to a school in Marvel. And when I started this project, it was at the height of COVID. And they were going to school about an hour away, 2 days a week. And I was actually going into my first year of grad school, going to classes remotely. So we had like this really small window of time where I was able to be there as much as possible, and for them to see me as much as possible. And I think that contributed a lot, especially early on when I was getting to know people and build trust within this community. So right now in Elaine, there's not really a place for these kids to go. And the basketball court is really the only place for them to be themselves freely. Pictured here is V. Poindexter Pfizer Park, much like the entire town. It's a site of contention. It is currently in a legal battle with the Glass family over land reparations, since the land was taken by the city with no permission or legal agreement. And it's now known as ETO Park, ETO meaning Elaine taking over, which was a saying that they used to have back in the day when the high school basketball team used to play their rivals. They would always be down before the fourth quarter and they would come back. So they started chanting ETO. And now it's kind of a moniker for a lot of the kids in the community and some of the older people. I wouldn't call it a street clique of sorts, but you will see like a 60-year-old, repping ETO, and then you'll also see a 5-year-old repping ETO. Sidebar, V. Poindexter Pfizer was the mayor of Elaine from 1974 until 2004. And surprisingly enough, he now lives less than 10 minutes from me. And I live about 5 hours from Elaine. So that's a little weird. And he's also one of the few city officials in Elaine to have been quoted as referring to the massacre as basically an inflated tragedy. That's a little fun fact. Not sure how fun. my process for making work in Elaine started very similar, like I said, to Wadmalaw, but since the first initial visit, I met some of the kids in Elaine who helped transform me photographing into more of a social practice that I didn't really understand at first. But since the initial visit, one method is now a tradition. I shoot film, I go down there with my film camera, and the kids use my digital camera. And that little interaction led to workshops. And last summer, luckily, it led to a photo camp that we hosted at the Elaine Legacy Center. That is, well, sorry, which used to be the old elementary school. And that was basically a way for me to see how these kids are seeing. At first, I think I wanted to do something really technical in terms of education and opening up their minds to photography. And that quickly took a back seat. And I really just wanted to figure out what they were interested in making pictures of, whether that was music, sports, cars, anything, even the landscape. And over time, like I had to pick out a few that I really like to work with, and you know, a group of 12, dwindled down to a group of 8. But every time I go back, every kid is able to use the camera at some point. And we built so much of a connection and trust that now I can just like leave for hours on end and leave my camera with them and know that it's going to be safe, which took some time. And of course, throughout this work, I'm also touching on the history within the landscape of this place. It's specifically thinking about some of the issues that are kind of buried underneath the surface that most people don't know about unless you go there and talk with people. This is a community that's essentially ran by landowners. There's not much power that the mayor has or city council has that big money field owners don't have. And that's who makes the laws around here. That's who influences the sheriff's department. That's who has their hand in with the treasurer and the city council. And those are some things that you don't really understand until you start talking to people. And it also speaks to how little this place changes in a long period of time. And that's geographically, of course, within the landscape, but also within the politics of this community. There's probably a lot more to say about this work. It's been going on for about 1.5 years, and I don't know when it will be done. I don't like the idea of thinking about when a series is over. I really am interested in having kind of an imperial courts moment where I want to see these kids grow. You know, I want to see these kids grow and change or not change. I want to see this place alter or not alter. But at the same time, I want to be working with the community one-on-one. So I do plan on continuing my photo camp this summer, and will hopefully be further along in working with the photographs made by the kids. They're all in color. They're amazing. They're really cool pictures because they don't have the rules of photography to abide by. Like there's no real thirds for them. I'll just say that. But my goal is for this work to exist as an ever evolving archive created by myself and the residents of Elaine within the Elaine Civil Rights Center, which is under construction now, but will hopefully open up by this fall, fingers crossed. And that's basically an overview of the last couple of years of my work, and I'll stop sharing now. Thank you.
Hi there. Hopefully everyone can hear. Let me share my screen real quickly. Screen. All right, is everybody able to see if everything's good? Okay, cool. Hi, sun's in my face. I'm gonna sit slightly away. My name is Katina. I am based out of San Francisco, California. My project though, or my series actually is like a personal account of when I went back to my family in Texas back in like 2020 for my, sorry, I'm a little nervous, for my bisabuela's path, like her funeral. It was definitely like a really trying time just because it was like kind of like fresh in the pandemic, and my mother and I didn't know like if we were even going to make it. But yeah, essentially that's kind of what this my project is about. But yeah, for today I was gonna kind of actually just go a little bit. Sorry, I'm just gonna skip over my artist statement. Kind of like just talk about my family, because I feel like in order for me to like talk about like the history of place, especially for me as someone who, even though my whole family is from Texas on my mom's side, like, and I've lived there for a part of my life, I actually just never really had that connection to the land and to the place the way the rest of my family did. So I feel like in order for me to like show that connection, I kind of have to like tell their story in a little bit. And a lot of it started with my bisabuelos, who met, I think, in the early 50s. My great grandpa, he was actually born on reservation outside of Taylor. It was like Lipan Apache Reservation. And my great grandma, she came by way of Mexico to Taylor for work. And that was primarily to do like farming, because that was kind of what was most prominent in that region. But yeah, we'll keep going. Yeah, so Taylor, Texas is about 30 miles, I think, 30-ish miles northeast of Austin. And it is a very, very tiny town. Its population is about 45% Latino population, and poverty level is about 15-20%. Most people making like under 18,000 a year. So it's a very small place. Not a lot as far as like economy goes, apart from just railway and then farmland. But yeah, as far as like my family, a lot of them, sorry, I'm kind of nervous. Wait a second. Yeah, as far as like my family and like the history of the town goes, like once they like met each other and they like fell in love, they you know, that's where they decided to plant themselves and to stay. And like since then, like many generations had ended up sorry, the light is like on my face really badly. If I can like screen. Sorry. That's a little better. Also losing my train of thought. Yeah, so back to what I was getting at. Just my family, they've been living there. They just, you know, they ended up staying there after like many generations, including my mom, and just varying like throughout the years, we would like kind of come back and visit. But because it was a place that I didn't really know personally, I never really had that connection to the land and to the town. And because of that, yeah, I actually kind of built a little bit of a resentment to the place. It was just very different to California. But one thing that kept wanting to like draw me back was just knowing like why my family decided to stay there, especially considering like all of the factors about Taylor. It's super small, it's very like low income, used to be very like racially segregated in the past. So I just didn't really understand why they wanted to stay there. But yeah, like when I went back for my great grandmother's funeral, and I like reconnected with all of my family members again, along with my mother, that was kind of when it started to like hit me a little bit, like the specialness of this place and like why they wanted to stay. And really, it didn't even necessarily have to do with the place. It actually had more to do with like ourselves and our family, like, and just the fact that that's where we all were. Like 4 generations came from here, so just like it was like 4 generations of history, of memory, of like, yeah, just it was like that whole little town was kind of like our little time capsule in a sense. Like even for my mom, who like various times throughout the years like would like go there and then like leave. But yeah. Yeah, so this is actually a photo of my great grandparents' house that they built, I think in like the later 50s. So it was a little bit after they were married. But just about everybody in my family was either born in this house or had lived in this house at one point, including my mom. And when we went back, this most recent trip on like for the funeral, we went inside and it was like walking through like a little museum of our own house. It was actually really, really cool. Just like everything inside was just like had some type of memory, like just the walls were covered in photographs. Every single little knickknack that was kept, whether it was like from a baptism or like a school event or a wedding, like my Bisabuelos kept everything. And like also everything from like my grandpa, and everything from like my great aunts and uncles to aunts and uncles and cousins, just like kind of compiled into this house. And so like everywhere you turn, like if you picked up anything, like that held a memory and that held a story. And then, so that was like when I really started to like understand like this is like why my family, you know, stayed here after all these years. But yeah, that's a photo of like my family when they were like sifting through photos, kind of like just going through memories, just like throughout the years. And then, yeah, I'll kind of actually end this little short note just because my nerves are a little, but I'll end this like with my grandparents and my mom, because this was one of the very few photos of them together, and actually one of the few moments that they were together in Taylor specifically, before my grandmother decided to move to California with my mom and kind of like end their chapter in Taylor and kind of branch off into like new histories, to new places. But yeah, sorry for being really nervous. I'm kind of a little shy, but yeah. Thank you.
All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you all can hear me okay. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so my name is Jamie Robertson, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about my series, Charting the Afroscape of Leon County, Texas. I did my artist talk a couple like last week, so for those of you who maybe saw it, it won't be a repeat. I'll try to talk about the series a little differently, especially in regards to the theme of the panel. But Charting the Afroscape of Leon County, Texas is an autobiographical examination of my family history through documentary photography, as well as my family's archive. The term Afroscape I borrowed from Dwayne Dieterville, visual scholar, who wrote extensively about Khalil Joseph's piece, Until the Quiet Comes, as a short film. And I was really moved by his writings in regards to that short film, and also really, I guess, became enthralled with this word Afroscape, and have taken it and have kind of like taken it as my own and use it in regards of looking for Black landscapes in Leon County. And so I approached this series through that lens, through a more Afrocentric lens, or even an Afro-religious lens in a way. And I'm going to read the last part of the statement. The camera for me serves as a device to explore African diasporic cosmologies and Black people's relationship to place, time, and the sacred. Night for me is no longer just a period of time in which the sun is below the horizon. For those who know that the time of night is spiritually active, this Afroscopic lens allows me to meditate on the home place as a Black landscape in rural Texas. And so the home place is the way my family refers to the land in which our generations have lived on. And so in this, on the screen now is the photograph of my great-grandfather's house in Hopewell, Texas, which is in Leon County. And so I want to talk about just my approach to family history and this series, and like starting with official archives and really trying to find my family in official archives and kind of failing at it a little bit. But then, falling back more onto my family as an archive themselves, whether that being the actual photographs or the actual people who are still alive to tell the stories. And of course, the landscape itself, I believe, is an archive. And so I have been really interested in family history since, probably for the past decade or so, and have always done like little, researching here and there, trying to piece together some kind of, family stories and genealogy plans and maps and all of these things with people. But I also wanted to know more about the actual county itself. And so Leon County is in what we consider East Texas, but it's also kind of like central East Texas, because I feel like some people who are from East Texas will say that it's not truly East Texas. And so the county is kind of in between, if you've ever been to the state, between going to Dallas and Houston along the interstate. My great-grandmother's side of the family, and I'm talking most primarily about my maternal family, but my great-grandmother's side of the family is from a place called Egypt Community, and trying to find any mention of the Egypt Community in these little historical sketches that I was able to find through different libraries was really difficult. I only found one mention of it, and it's in this book from 1946 that's called Through the Years, A Historical Sketch of Leon County and the Town of Oakwood by Frances Jane Leathers. And in it, she talks really kind of extensively, mostly about this particular page. She's talking about her great-grandfather, Joel D. Leathers, and just how wonderful of a man he is and whatnot, and that he eventually settles in this place called Egypt. And that's really that's mentioned of it. Egypt Community in Leon County, like so many other communities like Hopewell, where my great-grandfather's photograph was taken, is an unincorporated community. It was a Black community. And so there's very little mention of the Black communities that I grew up knowing a lot about from just frequently going to the county on the weekends as a child. And so it was kind of frustrating to know that this history exists, to have heard it through my family and not see it in books. But I really do believe that, books are not the official archive is not the be all end all of history, and that there's so much more within our own personal families to uncover, and that has as equal value as anything you can find in an official archive. And so for me, it really became about the landscape and looking through my family records. Like for instance, on the screen, I was able to find my great-grandfather, who's also pictured here, Jenkins Luss, his registration card for when he served in believe it was World War II. So you can see like it's written in his hand, and he was 31 years old, and the place of birth was Nineveh, which is another community in Leon County, but of his family eventually settling in Hopewell. The significance of this photograph, and as well as the photograph in the previous slide of his house, was that I had never seen his house before. I grew up always going to my great grandmother's house, and that particular image, which is shot at night, the house is very different in that it's more maintained, whereas my great grandfather's house is not. It's pretty much in a state of decay. No one has lived in it since 2000. So it's been sitting just in a field for 22 years with no one really to tend to it. And so this moment for me is the moment of trying to find the house and looking for it for about like 20 minutes or so, with my mom and my grandmother driving around in the backwoods of Leon County looking for this house. And I had kind of resigned that I was never going to find it, and that this field would just kind of serve as, where it used to be. But little did I know, if we just kind of kept going back and forth, we would find it. It was some kind of on the other side of this. And so, like I said, my family ends up becoming the main source of a family history for me, and like putting together our narrative, whether that is actual things that have happened, or more kind of myth making that takes place. For instance, there's this kind of story of one of our ancestors that after emancipation, he was apparently from Maryland and walked all the way from Maryland to Texas, but that really isn't the case. He was born in the county. For what reason this story was kind of made up, I have no idea. His parents were enslaved in the county in a town called Leona. And so, him making this story being kind of passed down and talked about as if, he was just this person who did this extraordinary thing of walking through the South to get to Texas, is really interesting. And so a lot of these kind of myths or various stories come from my grandmother, and her being this kind of keeper of knowledge. She's, even at like 86 years old, she's really good with dates and remembering, people in our extended family, remembering their birthdays like to the year, which I think is a really, I don't know, it's a skill that I think a lot of us kind of take for granted. I can't even remember some of the years of, well, I was going to say some of my friends, but we're kind of close in age, so it was close to the 80s. But my grandmother becomes this keeper of stories, as well as my aunts and my aunt and my uncle as well. And so, another story that was really, really pressed on me was about how my great grandmother kept by her bed a Bible open to Psalms 91 with a knife across it. And even when there are, and particularly also when they were like tornado warnings and such things, like inclement weather that was coming and you had to go into the center of the house, she would bring the Bible in the room and have it on Psalms 91. And so Psalms 91 is the Psalm of protection. They didn't tell me whether or not she read from it or not, but to me, this action, this putting the knife and the Bible together is really meant to draw on the power of the Bible as an object or as a charm, which pulls from more of a Afrocentric view of Christianity, or like an African infused Christianity that pops up a lot in the South. So looking at things like root work, hoodoo, those kinds of things. But if you were to ask like my grandma or my great grandmother whether or not they were practicing those things, they would tell you they were Christian, but really a lot of their Christianity is influenced by our African heritage. And so it just kind of comes in these little like trickles here and there. And so the Bible for me, I had always kind of been just obsessed with this idea of trying to recreate this image, and finally got the opportunity to when I was at my great grandmother's house. And so this Bible has been in this room for, and you can tell that it's been open to this page for a very, very long time because it's pretty worn. And, you know, my grandmother marrying into the family also adopted this tradition as well from her mother-in-law, that even at her house here in Houston, where I'm based, all of the rooms in her house has a Bible open to Psalms 91. She doesn't have the like knives around the house on it, but you know, there's something to it. And it's not even that they're necessarily reading from it. It's that the Bible is open to this particular passage, and that somehow this charm is doing more for us being just open than, you know, just reading from it alone. So of course there are the stories, but then of course there's also the archive as well. And so my family has so many photographs of ancestors from the 50s, the 40s, and this is particularly one of my favorite images that I've run across in our family albums. And it says that, and I really love when people used to write on photographs. I know some people may have mixed feelings about it, but I really enjoy seeing like someone's hand on the image in that way. But this says, "This is my cotton made in 1953, Howard standing in it." And the Howard standing in it may be kind of hard to read because it kind of wraps around onto the side of the image. This is my great grandmother's brother, Howard, standing in this field of cotton. My mom talked about me being a little girl and going with them to pick cotton. And this, of course, is well after emancipation, after Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, moving into civil rights. But this cotton field was owned by members of my family, particularly Uncle Howard. This was his field. And people could come and work the field and make money by selling the cotton, you know, in town. So, you know, it's a different narrative than what we traditionally know about, like Black people in cotton, this, you know, this plant that we immediately associate with large plantation systems. There were no large plantation systems in Leon County. It was more small farms, and people were definitely enslaved there, but you may have like a farm where it's maybe like 4 or 5 enslaved people working, and not so much this huge system that you would see in other parts of the state. But this image I really love because it's, I mean, he has a lot of, I feel like he has a little bit of an attitude staring back at us in the image. And also, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, this is mine. I own this. And I really love that about this photograph. So of course, like family archival photographs, and then, you know, there's the ones that I'm able to find in our family albums, but of course, the ones that I've been able to find online through like Ancestry or Family Search. I found my great-grandfather's grandfather. Because my great-grandfather, if we look at the family reunion t-shirt, my great-grandfather's father was Gus Lusk. And so Gus was John Lusk's son. So this is his great-grandfather. Or grandfather. I'm getting them mixed up. I'm sorry. But either way, you know, just being able to find images like this are always such a delight and surprise, because there are family members who are out in the world who I have not even met yet, not even at reunions, who have images and that are sharing them online with everyone. And so, you know, that is also really special. And then using things like the family reunion t-shirts to kind of piece together who is related to who and how. The Les Cayley family is a really interesting one in that this woman, Charity, who we have no idea what she looked like, but she had 2 sets of kids with 2 different men. And so these 2 families are, of course, forever bonded together and still have reunions even to this day. Which is, you know, I think really special that you have like, you know, these half siblings who are kind of like not necessarily looking at each other as half siblings, but, you know, as full on siblings as a family. And so I found, of course, I had found the image of John Lusk a couple of years ago, but when I was going and looking for my great-grandfather's house, I also went by the cemetery in Hopewell and found lots of course, headstones dedicated to my ancestors and people who I never really knew, or, you know, would see their names on the shirts or in records. And then, but to see them, to see their headstones and know that there's an part of them that is in the soil, that is in the landscape, is, you know, it's another experience, right? There's, you know, you can obtain knowledge from research, and that has a particular feeling, but to be in a place where you are related to the people buried there, and it's so much of your bloodline there in the soil, you know, that is a different kind of experience and a different kind of, I guess, education in a way. And so, you know, you have all of these members of my family being represented either through the landscape that they physically are in, whether that's the cemetery, their houses, archival family photographs, and occasionally sometimes, you know, documents that I'm able to find at the time. And of course, you know, in those cemeteries, a lot of Black cemeteries, because of course, in the county, a lot of the cemeteries are segregated. And what I did find that you will have, particularly from the left side of my family, there are two sets of lusts. There is a white side and a Black side. And so I was a little confused at first, but realized, you know, there is, you know, that overlap, and that even though Black people currently make up about like maybe 7% of the population in Leon County, that there's still a lot of like cross relationship between Black people and the white people who lived in this place, going back to enslavement, but even after that as well, because they were continuing to live amongst each other, even though segregated. Some Black people are, of course, working for white people in the county, whether that's as a laundress or, you know, different kind of domestic jobs of such as that. But in regards to the cemetery, you know, there are a lot of my ancestors buried there, but then there's also people who we don't really, you know, maybe their families couldn't afford to buy a headstone for them, which was the case, you know, for my great-grandmother for the longest time. And so my mom purchased one for her. And so you may find something really like modest, such as like just a rock, like a really big rock, like you can see in the image on the right, along with artificial flowers, to mark that this person is buried here, so that we don't forget them, even though, you know, future generations may not know who this person is. And so, you know, for me, this body of work, I definitely see it as a volume one. It was centered greatly around my great-grandparents, my great-grandmother, and my great-grandfather. I talked mostly about my great-grandfather's side of the family in this presentation, but there's still so much for me to explore within the county. There's so many other unincorporated Black communities that I have relationship to that I want to go and explore further. And so I want to thank you all so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions and discussing my work along with the other panelists, and as well as with Delphine. So thank you so much.
Yes, Trent, claps for everyone. Thank you all so much for sharing. And these are all such personal projects, so I'm really grateful that you all are so willing to speak so intimately about your families, which is such an exceptional way to link all of your projects as well. And part of a way that I want to sort of highlight the kinds of interventions you're making into a history of photography, which is often so much of an outsider looking upon folks that they are curious about, and then sort of abandoning them, whereas you all have such commitment to the folks that you're photographing. And that actually sort of brings me to wanting to return to Trent's presentation, because we started with you, and I wanted to ask a little bit about sort of the politics of negotiating what we might call photojournalism. And I think you have such a sense of collaboration with the folks in Elaine. And I was just sort of curious about whether or not you could keep talking about your commitment to them as a community. I guess I'm trying to work through how photojournalists often produce really incredible work, but the fraught nature of it is that they leave their subjects behind, and suddenly there is this closure. And so I wanted to give you space to talk through a little bit more how you imagine sort of dreaming and hoping for a way to stay committed to the Elaine residents for years to come, including the children specifically.
Yeah, thank you for that question to start things off. I was told from my first couple trips there that I was not the first one to be doing this. National Geographic has been there, Guardian, New York Times, and they usually talk to the same 2 or 3 people, and then they leave. And that is historically how it's been for press photographers coming to Elaine. You know, I assured most people that I spoke with early on that that was not going to be the case. However, you can only believe so much from somebody you just met. So I had to prove it to them, and I kept coming back, and I'm not only coming back, but I'm offering prints every time. So anyone who gets photographed is able to receive their print. But I think what really set it off for me, and I don't know if, I don't think what I do is photojournalism. I get like jobs like that for other, completely other things, but for the work I'm making in Elaine, it's weird to categorize it. I like the word new documentary. I think that's really interesting. But there's so many tropes and conventions of documentary photography that I think historically are just really, really bad and that plagued the medium for a long time. So I'm always thinking about intention, and I didn't know how far our interactions would go, me and the kids in the beginning. It started off as they can do this thing while I do this thing. And then it took going through a couple critiques and talking with people and realizing that the photographs are really like a subsidiary to the work, right? Like the main work is like this relationship I'm building with these people in Elaine. And so it took me a little bit to understand that like the photographs is just like a product of this community building. Or I shouldn't say building, community's already there before me, but relationship building. Moving forward, like I think the biggest thing for me in like keeping that connection is just going down there as much as possible, but also realizing that life is real. And if I don't go there for a month or 2 months, like it's okay. You know, they're not just going to forget you, but it's making sure that your intentions are pure. And I think intentionality is very, very important when you're making work like this. And then also talking with people, asking how they feel about it. That's really important to me. Like I think the biggest voice of opinion that I care about in this work is people who live in Elaine. So, yeah.
And if I could ask a quick follow-up, it's a little odd, but it was something I was curious about, because I think the photographs from the Sea Island, there are interiors that are absolutely incredible, amazing images. But I was noticing that most of Elaine is outdoors, and so it takes us into a much different relationship with land and place, and of course, kind of negotiating what it means to live private lives in public. But I just thought maybe you could talk a little bit about maybe that line between interior and outside for you in Elaine specifically.
Yeah, since starting, I knew I wanted to photograph inside people's houses, and I also know that's like one of the hardest things you can do with a stranger. But in the last like 3 or 4 months, like there is interior work. It is in color, and like that's kind of like the separation of a lot of the work. I think for a lot of people, specifically the kids in Elaine, there is like this front you have to put up when walking outside and being outside. And that could be like a generational thing, but like there's this machoism that like the young boys have to have, and then there's like this certain way that the girls say that they need to act. And we've talked about this, right? And for me, I think like the interior shots, I wanted to make moments that are people existing in their private spaces that aren't outside in the world. And then this is also the home they've made for themselves. So for me, I wanted those images to be in color because I think it speaks to the entirety of like who a person is, especially if you're photographing them inside. But I think portraits do that regardless. But yeah, for the outside pictures, I kind of like them staying in black and white, just so like it's this clear gap that like, you know, this world is here, this world is here. They're not in the same, but these can be the same people in both of these pictures. But I think the color will add a lot to understanding someone's identity. Same with like how their homes look inside too. Yeah.
I really appreciate you locating the fact that it requires a lot of rapport and respect to be able to access a home. And I kind of want to stay with interiors, Katina, and talk about the sort of museum that is your great-grandparents' home. And I was sort of thinking about these layers of curating that are happening. There are multiple curators in this space that are sort of designating what goes up in each corner, but also you're making very particular decisions about the photographs you've chosen to share with us from that family archive, and also the way that you're putting them in dialogue with your own photographs. So I thought maybe you could talk about that selection process. And if you wanted to share screen again, please do so. But if not, I'm just very curious about your, curating your family images.
Yeah. So as far as like my intent when it came to like documenting everything on that trip, I had never actually intended for this to turn into a series. This was just something like very personal and like kind of like a coping thing for me, and something that I could like offer to my family just to like help with the preservation of our visibly local past. So as far as like whatever I captured for the series and like what I ended up choosing, it was just anything that caught my eye, that I could see the story, or something that like another family member I noticed that they had an attachment to. And actually, see if I can really quickly open back up the photos for that. Give me one moment to scroll and then I'll share screen. Okay. Hopefully, you can see this. Yeah, these two diptychs kind of show a little bit of like representation of just different objects that kind of do hold memory. The photo on the left was my great-grandparents' bedroom. It's very, very tiny. It had space for their bed and then a couple shelves and like a dresser for their clothes, but every corner was literally just covered in something, whether it was like family photos, mostly family photos. My family's, Mexican Catholic, so we definitely had a lot of like just different artifacts that kind of like represented spirituality, but just like there were like toys everywhere, just like little things that I could tell probably belonged to like my grandpa or one of my great aunts and uncles when they were children, that held memory. Or like the picture in the left with the diptych, it's my aunt holding like my great grandmother's like one of her favorite shades of lipstick, and like how like even like that was holding memory, because like my aunt remembers her mom, she like remembered or like her grandma, my great grandma, she like remembered her putting on her lipstick before she would like go to church every Sunday, and so like that held a memory. And so just like walking into this house and just seeing everything, just I don't know, definitely felt very special. Definitely showed like where like we made our mark here, we planted our roots here, especially in this town that is so small, so tiny. So, but we definitely like made this space our own. Yeah, and I don't know. It's just something like, as far as like what I wanted to share, it was mainly just things that I thought were special to them, because this was also, you know, their story too, not just mine. That was something I was really trying to kind of show the world when I did decide to turn this into a project.
Yeah, and if we could stay with your slides, I would love to see that last slide again, and to talk, hopefully have you talk about this relationship between writing and sort of naming and the photograph. I think your last slide has a poem on it, right?
Oh, yes, yes. This one. This is this is it's my, you know, bisabuela. It's like when we, you know, all the close family before we like went to the church, we all, you know, met. Oh gosh, I'm not entirely sure what part of the church it was in, but it's essentially where she was at. It was like an opportunity for us to all say our goodbyes to her before we did the ceremony. And that was just kind of like going into the photograph a little bit. When I was like documenting moments from right here, that was like the first time I had seen a lot of my family in over a decade. Same with my mom. And we were seeing them during this like really, not just like passing of my bisabuela, but like also like during this really trying times, like beginning of the pandemic, and nobody really knew, like, you know, the world was just, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so I feel like I used my camera as a way to kind of like, you know, break that barrier a little bit and like kind of reconnect. And then I definitely had to ask permission. It's like, is everyone cool if I take pictures? And everyone was like more than cool with that. But as far as like the writing and the poem goes, that was just a little bit of something I kind of did for myself. I'm usually a really visual person. That's why I went into photography. I'm gonna turn on the light real quick. It's getting dark. So as like kind of like just like a grieving thing, I did decide to do a little bit of writing, just kind of like just like in form of practice. But yeah,
if I can ask, because I think this poem really speaks to all three of the projects we're talking through today, and I also really believe in the way that artists understand their series altogether, sort of the rhythm of a photo book, the way that one image comes after another. And so if I could ask you to read the poem out loud, I just thought it would give us a different sense of your various art practices.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Okay. Los muertos nunca mueren. The dead never die. Their traces can be seen and felt everywhere. Through the smell of the humid Texas air, through the generations of primos running in the yard, clapping as elders celebrate the life of one's passing. Through the forlorn patriarch who still lives another day without his beloved esposa of 67 years. Through photographs hung on the walls of the house so many generations family had lived, including a teenage mother shortly after giving birth to her firstborn daughter. They live on through us, they live on within us. Actually, now like rereading the poem, it's kind of bringing back a little bit of like why I wrote this. I think I did write this pretty like right after I had like gone there. It was just kind of like little like, and like in a sense I like wrote the poem like little like things that I noticed like while I was there, like just like when I like talked about like my cousins running through the yard like at the wake after the funeral, like as like all the elders were like celebrating this passing, like they too like understood what this was, but you know they were like in their own little world. Or like just like watching my great grandfather, like, you know, it was his wife of 67 years and they were madly in love, and just kind of, I feel like I did observe him a lot just because I was like, what is his experience of going through all of this? And then also like my mom, who this is her family, and I feel like my relationship to the side of the family is greatly like has a lot of similarities to her as well, just because she was not taken away from that side of the family, but my mom, like my grandparents, they were an interracial family in the early 70s, and that was really, really trying, especially in like the middle of nowhere, Texas. So like it was definitely very understandable why my grandma left. She just knew it was like better opportunity for her and for my mom. But because of that, like my mom, she never had that connection. She felt like an outsider. And because of that, like I think I and my siblings, we also kind of felt like outsiders. But when we went back, we kind of realized like, oh, this is like kind of all in our heads a little bit. Like none of that really exists. Like we're all family and we all love each other. And like, I don't know, it was just like really healing to go there. And like, especially like as an adult and all my aunts and uncles, I have a lot of aunts and uncles who are like literally the same age as like me and my siblings. So they were adults too. And so we like really bonded and connected because all we had was these like memories of each other as children, but you know, they weren't really fully developed. And so I don't know, just like making those connections again was like, you know, really, really healing. And being able to like document this series for them was like also really healing, because this was like another opportunity for her to like, you know, the memory of her to continue living on, especially considering that she was the matriarch of the family. Like she and my great grandpa are kind of like, you know, our family, obviously our histories go beyond them, but that's like where, that's the place marker for our family's history is them and all the generations that's come since then.
No, I think the series is so incredibly sensitive, and it feels like you're still able to really respect like sort of the mourning and catharsis that your family needed while still being able to negotiate what it means to share this with such a public audience. And I think that sort of delicacy of your writing really helps us orient around that sensitivity too. I just really love that beginning line, "The dead never die." And I think it also really speaks to Jamie's projects as well. And I wanted to sort of ask Jamie, do you mind stopping sharing the screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because Jamie shared some of the amazing writers that she's thinking with, including the scholar who introduced the term Afroscape. And I was sort of hoping we would have the chance to talk through the way you understand cosmologies in your series a little bit more, Jamie, especially sort of this line between the living and the dead. And I think cosmologies are such a particular way of understanding West African presence. So it'd be great if you could introduce it a little bit to the audience, but also how we could perhaps see it hovering around some of your photographs too.
Yeah, sure. So I'm particularly interested in the cosmology of the Bantu Congo. And so looking at the symbol for, in like the Southern United States, we call it the crossroads, but it's also referred to as the Kinga de Congo, which is, or Yawa cross. And it's literally, actually, I think, and like, if I could share my screen, I have it from the presentation I did last week, just to kind of to show, so that I'm not just, you all can visualize it while I'm talking about it, and it's not just like a abstract thing. But for me, you know, this symbol was really powerful, and I was reading before I was reading Dwayne Dieterville, I was reading Flash of the Spirit by Robert Farris Thompson. And so that work, he talks about this symbol and the different art that comes out of the Congo region. And he's talking like, it's not like the Congo as we know it as the Democratic Republic of Congo today, but just this general region of Angola, Cameroon, and what is Congo today. That's a west central part of Africa. And so while it's like a part of a religious system, and it shows up in a lot of religious systems in the New World with, you know, things like Santeria, Candomblé, Vodun, like all of those things, it's also a worldview and a way of understanding just how the world works in general. And so for me, I have adopted it in my approach to looking at the landscape when I'm photographing, and particularly when I'm photographing, you know, a lot of my great grandmother's landscapes, I'm photographing them at night. And nighttime is considered the time when spirits are the most active. The spirit world and the physical world are mirrors to each other. And so, you know, I'm thinking about, you know, I'm absorbing all of this kind of framework from these books, from these different writers, and also seeing it in the work of other artists like Khalil Joseph. And when I began to put my photo book together, I kind of based it off of this symbol, which is us, which each little circle represents the sun in different stations in the sky. And so, you know, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And so this symbol moves in a counterclockwise direction. And so for me, I started everything, I guess, at night, because I wanted to start in this kind of spiritual realm with the work. And so I know I didn't show this work or, you know, these images for today, but, you know, when I'm shooting out at night, and particularly, you know, this particular image, you know, I'm out there by myself. I mean, my family's in the house, like doing whatever. And so I'm out there by myself, and, you know, my back is to the road, and like, this is what's behind me as I'm shooting. And so it is kind of, it feels kind of eerie, but not in a way that, I don't know, like it's, I guess, more uncanny feeling. I don't know how to describe it. Like there, you feel that there's a presence there when you're there shooting. And I definitely think that because I'm using longer exposures to take images at night, you know, because you have to be patient to get a good night image. I feel that some of that gets translated, some of that spirituality or spiritual essence gets imbued in the images. And at first I'm like, oh, well, maybe people aren't going to really see that. But even without me saying that, people have told me that they feel like there's something there. And even in the images in the daytime, the same kind of, people have often said the same kind of quality is there. And so it's, you know, I don't really know how else to describe it, but it's just, you know, when I put this series together, I wasn't immediately thinking about, oh, I'm going to make everything based off of this symbol. Just everything just kind of fell into place as I'm absorbing this new information and then making work separately. It just kind of all clicked together to frame it in this way.
Yeah, I feel like the diagram really helps us locate the particular like way that the sun is this hovering presence, the way we understand the cosmology. But your photographs help us like access that as an atmospheric effect. And I think the way that we don't necessarily see the sun in that darkness helps us enter that kind of relationship to what isn't seen anyway, which are these sort of ancestors and spirits. And I really love that. I also, and it's kind of an invitation to invite you to share the screen again, but I was really interested in the way that you're sort of negotiating many different kinds of landscapes. We sort of have this cotton plantation, we have sort of the beauty of a kind of chaos overgrown landscape, and then you have this really beautiful attention to soil specifically, which seems so specific to this part of Texas. So I thought maybe you could talk about your relationship with these different landscapes specifically.
Well, the landscape for my great-grandfather, like, was really unfamiliar to me. And I think that also kind of is portrayed, I think, in the images, and how overgrown the area is, and how, you know, the house is just kind of left there in abandonment. it was, even though like it was, you know, it's in that kind of state, I did get the chance to go in it after, like maybe a year after I photographed it. When I first found it, I was with my mom and my grandmother, and they were kind of scared to go to go into the house, and we saw like animal tracks, and we weren't really kind of sure what kind of animal, whether if it's like a deer or a wild boar, because we didn't have any kind of like, you know, protection mace or anything with us. We're just out in the woods. And so that photograph for me is it's really special because I have such a connection with my great-grandfather, even though I never knew him. In my photo book, I talk about how, you know, he died the year I was born, and my mom didn't know she was pregnant with me when she went to see him in the hospital before he passed. And he, you know, she thought he was going to be fine. Like he was sitting up in the bed talking and laughing with her. And so I often think about like how I was in the womb and listening, like taking part in this moment. And so I think about that house, you know, and that there's still a part of him there. And that even though I was physically there, he's also there, but like we're in different times. Like we can't access each other in like physically, but we're both still there in some way. And so for me, the landscape, you know, particularly that one, you know, it feels like more spiritual to me. And with my great grandmother's, like, I think photographing it, because it's so familiar, photographing it at night made it a little bit more uncanny. So giving it that feeling that they're, you know, because typically we don't go outside at night when we're there, unless it's all of us together, you know, maybe around a fire or something, but we don't really just hang out at night up there. I don't know why we don't, like, it's just kind of a thing. No one's ever really said like, okay, it's time to go to bed, like go inside. And so being out there and photographing at night was a really different kind of experience and created a different relationship to that place that I wasn't familiar with growing up with it. So.
If I could ask one more question before we move to the audience, and sort of hoping you all might be able to take a moment to answer it. Coming off of Jamie's sense of the night and sort of that relationship to choosing when and how you can enter the night, I'm really taken with how dark Texas can be at times at these moments that I have visited. And I hoped you all could talk a little bit about the particular orientation of these projects in the South, and how you're understanding that sort of geographic specificity, but the ways that it also speaks to a kind of universal American experience as well. It's a big question, so we could also come back to it if you want to answer it through the questions to come from the audience.
I don't know who wants to start.
You can start, Jamie.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Trent. I mean, I've grown up in the South. I've lived in the South my whole life. And even when I left Texas, I went to another Southern state. I went right to Florida, you know? And so I feel like I have a very, I don't know, I have a very realistic view of the South. Like I know what it is and I know what it isn't. I know what it pretends to be. But also you are also, I think as a person from the South, you're hyper aware of how the rest of the country sees where you're from, you know, and like what's projected onto you, especially when you're a Black person from the South, and what people kind of expect you to be talking about in your work. And so for me, it's kind of tricky to navigate sometimes because, you know, sometimes people want to focus so much on like slavery and in that regard, but or like maybe always just wanting to go back to slavery, but there's still remnants of it in the present day. And I think being able to look at the present day and then tie it back to history has more, not more value, but like I think it makes it more tangible for people if they can see the thread that goes back to it. And I also think that, you know, for me, sharing my family's stories and sharing these images of Black people, you know, owning their own land and, you know, having family reunions and just being joyful in this place that they own, that their family has owned for like over 100 years. It disrupts narratives of, you know, like Black people not having things in the South, that even though there are people like who, you know, their land is stolen from them, that isn't the case for everyone. So we need more nuance when talking about Black land ownership in the South. We need multiple, and would like for people to see multiple perspectives. There are people who own land, and then there's people who sell it by choice, people who are tricked out of it, people, you know, like eminent domain comes in sometimes and just takes, you know, just because that happens as well. And so having all of these narratives, I think, are really important to help us to build a more complex view of the South than just kind of this flat, it's all racist kind of narrative that gets, you know, thrown on us down here.
I actually, my thoughts kind of like align with Jamie's. So, you know, for me, though I did live in Texas for 5 years, I actually I was also like going through puberty. So I know that had kind of an influence on my resentment to Texas, but I think it was because I moved there like as an older child and into like teenagehood. And I was just, you know, I was always kind of like an outsider to like, not, yeah, it was just like everything about Texas. It was like, just, you know, like all the stereotypes that kind of like what Texas has, like, yeah, those definitely are that like exist. And like, those were the things that like, I think I paid most attention to when I was really young, especially because like growing up mixed Latina and then also just being Californian, like made me stick out even more as a sore thumb. Like, they're like, oh, you're not from here. So like that had a really big influence on my relationship with the place. But with that being said, like with my, you know, photographing, when I went back to like Navisa Whale's funeral, I was like trying to not photograph like Taylor or just like our family's home through that lens of like me as the outsider, but I was trying to like photograph like what is it about this place that's so special to like 4 generations of my family that decided to stay here and like make this their home. And like long story short, like the reason is because that is just where like they planted their roots. Like it could have been anywhere really, but that was where they decided to. And just, you know, I think a lot of that has like a lot of beauty in it, because at the end of the day, it's mostly about family and the connections and the histories. And yeah, I don't know.
I think my answer is kind of all over the place. As someone who hasn't been in the South that long, like I went to school in Chicago and then I lived in LA before moving here. So my whole adult life has been in cities. And I think the work with Guatemala most likely could have happened anywhere. It's just so happened my family is from those Sea Islands in South Carolina. But I think moving into like working in Elaine, the biggest part for me was to like figure out what really happened and like understanding that most of what you read about the massacre in Elaine is not true. Even the books you read about the massacres in Elaine are not true. So I wanted to figure out what really happened. What was this place like after the massacre and before? And you know, it's not the usual story of Black identity in the South, in the antebellum South. You know, there was landowners, business owners, all throughout Elaine in the time back when it was like over 5,000 people. It was a thriving place up until the 80s. So, like for me, that was something that was really important about making work in the South, was figuring out how to get the story correct. And now I have like, and then I'm not gonna lie, I do have like this like romanticized idea of what the South is, and that's mostly from like photographers of the past, like that I love, honestly. I'm thinking about a lot of the farm security administration work that was made throughout the South that is highly problematic. But yeah, I think for me, when I think about making work down here, this goes back to the intention thing, but it's also a big part of it was trying to figure out some of the old untold stories. And yeah, I don't know, but at the same time, I don't know if that's a really good answer, because I honestly think I could be making this work anywhere. It just so happened to be here. There's Black people everywhere, and there's Black legacies everywhere. So yeah, sorry, I know it's not the best answer, but that's why I went last.
It wasn't the best question, but I appreciate you all trying to orient yourselves around the way that I framed it. I know we're a little over time, so I want to slip in one question from the audience from Susanna. She wrote, "Your stories are so intricately woven with the landscape as you make these communities and family legacies visible today. Can any of you speak to whether there is a personal sense of emerging or changing identity through time as the work unfolds?"
I'm kind of, I don't know if I should read this question as like my identity changing or of people I'm working and collaborating with, but yeah, I think for me, my identity and my role has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. To being not only a photographer, but I would also say a facilitator, someone that's trying to bring people together in a way that creates a meaningful dialogue or opens up this space that most people just kind of stick to themselves, even in a place like Elaine. Yeah, I gotta think about that one a little more. I know I've changed in other ways than that, but yeah.
I think for me, the project initially started, with me having anxieties about the future of this landscape, and like if it for some reason left my family's hands, like who are we without it? Because so much of my identity is wrapped up in this place. It was always the thing that made me feel special. Like as a kid, like I grew up in Houston, which is a major city, but on the weekends we would go to Centerville, to Leon County, to be in the country. And that was a really different experience, because where I lived in Houston as a kid, we couldn't really play outside. It wasn't like the best, there weren't even sidewalks where we lived at the time. And so to be somewhere where you can ride your bike and be free, and to know that my ancestors were free on this particular patch of land, it's really meaningful to me. And so there was a lot of anxieties about like what's going to happen to this house, particularly my great grandmother's house, because it's going to be passed down to my mom, her brother, and her sister, and whatever they decide. Like maybe they decide to tear it down or to build another house on top of it. And so I started documenting it just because I wanted proof that it was there, and just to have it on record that it existed, it was there, and that it's been in our family, for over 100, well, not that particular house, but the land had been in our family for, over 100 years. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure out how I would answer this question. I guess as far as like sense of like personal change through the work, I think the whole series, like as stated before, this was never intended to be a series. And so the fact that it became one was like a big change right there. And like I was also, this is like a whole part of like my family roots on like my mom's side. So in that sense, I think this project kind of helped me like get like be reintroduced to that side of me and to that side of my family, but also like become more accepting of it. And especially because my relationship to the land, to the place, to the town, there was a lot of resentment in my youth. A lot of that did eventually end up going away, and my perceptions really have changed of the place. I think a lot of that did have to do with just like my growth from like a youth to adulthood as well, too, not just this project alone.
I know we have one more question that we could get to from the audience, but I wanted to check in with our SF Camerawork folks before I bring it in.
Yeah, that's fine. One more, and then we probably should wrap up. Thank you.
All right, so I think this is from Asling. If time permits, what unexpected photography moment evolved or is evolving due to the personal nature of your subject as you tell the story? If I could add on to that, Katina, there was a particular image where you took a photograph in the reflection of another photograph, which seemed like an unexpected moment.
Yeah.
If you wanted to talk to that at all.
Sure, yeah. I was actually kind of thinking about that while I was trying to figure out how I wanted to like answer this question. You know, there's like a lot of moment. I was just trying to capture every moment of that trip that like I felt was like important, like, and a lot of that was kind of just capturing moments of my family, you know, what their experiences too. And so when I saw that, like I saw them like sitting at the table, it was like my mom, my grandpa, my great uncle, my aunt. They were all like so deeply immersed in all these photos, and like they just kept exchanging all these stories and just different memories. And I just thought it was like, you know, this is really beautiful that I'm like watching my family members right now, just kind of going down memory lane. But I too am also here right now. And I kind of, I think, became aware of the fact that I too was also, you know, present for once. And so I was like, I want to capture this because this is something that I want to remember down the road. And so in a sense, it's like kind of getting a little meta, but yeah. Yeah, definitely just unexpected moment that I just knew I really wanted to hold on to for years to come.
I don't know if it's a photography moment, but it's moments that happened in the field while I'm out photographing. So I think just getting anyone to open up about what they've seen, what they heard, what they've endured, for me is a moment that like evolves over time. And especially as I continue to go back, I'm getting more and more information. And then I'm able to like go, it's kind of like a domino effect. Like each person leads me to the next person. And that's kind of how the work in Wamala went as well. So I think anytime I'm able to really get first like hand stories and narratives about the inner workings of what goes on in this town in the last 5 to 10 years, I think those are moments of evolution. I guess I could say that, yeah, within the work.
For me, I mean, the whole, I guess more mine is in I guess the past tense, like the whole series, I really wasn't expecting it to come together in the way that it did. For instance, we had a family reunion in 2018, and I just wanted to document the family reunion just for my family so they would have the images. But there were quite a few of them that ended up being a part of the series as a whole. And so I really wasn't expecting that to happen. I mean, I didn't even think that I would want my family to be the subject of my work, because part of me felt a little unsure about, having their faces and things, and, whether or not like this is maybe exploiting my family in a way. But they've all been so supportive of the work that I've been doing. So it just kind of encourages me to keep documenting different special events and things like that. And so you never know like when it's going to turn into something more.
Well, I thank you all for ending on this note of continual evolution. And I'll hand it over to Olivia.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Delphine. Thank you to all of our panelists and to the audience for joining us tonight. This has been a wonderful talk, and I'm just really excited about all that I've heard. Do join us. We have actually another panel called Tearing Down Stereotypes with Christian Lee and Stephen Shames on undermining media bias, and that is on April 26th. So, excuse me, please join us for that as well. So I just want to say good night to everyone, and thank you so much.